Welcome everyone on behalf of Dallas College and the sustainability team. My name is Faye Davis and I am joined by my team members Sonia Ford and Lori Dela Cruz Lewis, who are working in the background. We are also grateful to be joined by our Dallas College WebEx support team. Today's session is Prairie Preservation, Pockets, Remnants, and Restorations. And I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Carly Aulicky. And Dr. Carly Aulicky is the North Texas Director of Outreach and Stewardship for the Native Prairies Association of Texas, or NPAT. In her position, Carly acts as a resource and spokesperson for management and conservation of native prairies. Carly monitors NPAT properties, works with landowners on conservation easements, holds educational workshops, and talks and coordinates volunteer efforts in programs and projects. Dr. Aulicky completed her doctorate at USGS Kansas Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit at Kansas State University in 2020. Thank you so much, Dr. Aulicky, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for this marvelous introduction and for inviting me to speak to you all today. I love talking about prairies any opportunity I get, so I'm going to be very excited throughout this talk, and I hope by the end of it you're all very excited about prairies and prairie preservation too. So prairies are grassland-dominated systems. They have by far the most grass species. As you can see in this picture here, what pops out at you right away are grasses. However, there's a tremendous wealth of forbs or flowering plants underneath, along with cacti and the occasional woody shrub. What you'll notice is mostly devoid in this ecosystem are trees. And that's because prairies are in a mid-successional state if we look at ecological succession of vegetation communities over time. Prairies are right in the middle. And if there were no disturbance in these systems, what would eventually happen is we would lose all of these grass species eventually to more and more woody species like junipers and mesquites until eventually it would be a woodland climax community. So prairies, to stay open, are completely dependent on disturbance as an ecosystem. And there's a couple of different shapes and forms of disturbance that have kept prairies open and have shaped how this ecosystem works. The first is fire. So in the tallgrass prairie, which is the ecoregion and ecosystem that Dallas falls within, historically these prairies would have burned every 3 to 5 years on a somewhat random cycle, because a lot of these fires would have been started by lightning strikes, which are not going to necessarily have a specific target, but cause a lot of random fires and turn over that vegetation by clearing off everything on top, making way for new plants to pop out of the seed bank. What's also really interesting about prairies as a system is they're relatively young. We're talking about 10,000 to 8,000 years old. So they actually aged in pace with a lot of the indigenous communities in North America. So prescribed burns and prescribed management of prairies with fire is almost as old, if not as old, as the prairies themselves. And it's an absolutely fantastic way to also keep that climax from reaching that woody state. As you can see in the right-hand side of that photo there, certain trees like junipers actually catch on fire really easily. So fire is a way to keep them nice and open and still predominantly dominated by grassland. Another major disturbance factor that prairies have grown to evolve with is grazing. And when we talk about historic grazing, predominantly we're talking about bison, though of course they were not alone. There were also pronghorn elk and deer grazing these systems, but bison at one point pre-European colonization were estimated to be somewhere between 30 to 60 million animals. And if any of you have actually been lucky enough to be close to a bison, and hopefully not too close, realize how absolutely massive these creatures are. The idea of that number of them being on the plains at one time is absolutely mind-boggling. And when you think of just their massive size alone, just by walking, they're adding disruption to the soil beneath their feet, They're pushing seeds further into the seed bank, which would allow them to stay and wait for an opportunity to sprout, say after a fire when everything above them is cleared off from a burn. They're also going to be pushing against woody trees and shrubs, and they also roll and create wallows. And you can actually see historic bison wallows in parts of the Great Plains to this day. So absolutely major impact on this system. Today, we don't really see as many bison on the plains, partly because they were hunted and systematically wiped out, but also in part because a lot of the Great Plains are now fenced off. What we do have in their place are cattle and other livestock, such as goats and sheep. And it is entirely possible to use livestock to mimic the same sort of patterns that bison would have on a natural landscape. So if we follow a rotation grazing, holistic grazing, or regenerative grazing, there's a lot of similar terms, and move our livestock, particularly cattle, into areas and allow parts of the prairie to rest, we can actually start to replicate that same destructive but important disturbance that we would have with these grazing animals. And they can actually be an absolutely fantastic conservation tool for prairies. And the last big disruption that we have in prairies is drought cycles. So within the Great Plains as a whole, we see droughts on a 20-year frequency for bouts of about 5 to 10 years. So if we look at the figure that I have on the right-hand side of my slide there, starting in the 1950s, you can see that we had a 5-year drought at that time. And stepping back, in this case, exactly 20 years, give or take, we look at a 8-year period drought. More recently in our history, and one that folks who were in the Great Plains, especially in Texas, are more inclined to remember, is the really severe drought that we had between 2011 and 2013 as part of this natural drought cycle. So what drought does, besides putting an incredible amount of stress on plants, is it can also shift your plant communities in a similar way as fire and grazing can. So annual species in particular are going to be more vulnerable than your perennial species, so you can have shifts in your vegetation over time brought on by drought. And the really cool thing about prairies is your native plants that are in prairie systems are adapted to all of these things. So prairie plants and native plants are incredibly well adapted to water stress. And what makes prairies really, really cool is when we look at what's going on underneath the ground. So big bluestem and the switchgrass on the right-hand side there, you can see just very quickly from the image, there's about as much root mass to those grass species as there is above ground. So when I walk out into a tall grass prairie, I'm about 5'6", I get completely swallowed up because big bluestem and switchgrass are about 6 feet tall. There's another 6 feet or more of roots underneath my feet just for these plants. And what's really cool and can be seen in Texas in a couple of different species are compass plants. They are species of sunflowers that produce multiple flower heads. They're absolutely gorgeous. They have root depths that can reach 15 feet, which is absolutely incredible. And this is what makes prairie plants and the native prairie plants different from some of the introduced grasses and things that are in Texas systems, such as some of the introduced brooms or introduced Johnson grasses and things like that. Their root system is comparatively a lot more shallow. So that means there's differences in the way that they function in terms of the ecological cycling, things that they can do as well. So prairies' really deep roots give them this tremendous ability to do carbon sequestration, for starters. There's been research suggesting that grasslands are actually more reliable carbon sinks than forests because of prairie root structure. If you have 15 feet of tissue below ground, that's 15 feet of tissue with carbon in it. And prairies loving disturbance, even if the top is burned off or grazed, they're still going to push back new shoots. and they're also going to hold the majority of that carbon still below ground. By comparison, we can flip the script with forests. Most of their tissue is above ground, most of their carbon is above ground, and when you have a disturbance event, such as some of the catastrophic wildfires that we just had, or deforestation, you're losing a lot of that carbon storage because it's above ground. They're also really amazing at water filtration, again, because of this tremendously deep root system, which is great for us because it also reduces the sedimentation and pollutants that reach our groundwater. But what's going to become increasingly important, especially with climate change and changes to our precipitation cycles in the Great Plains, is the ability of prairies to absorb rainwater. So some estimates have 250,000 gallons per acre that prairies are able to absorb, which is an absolutely amazing ecosystem service when you think about it. That's a mind-boggling huge amount of water just for a single acre. And again, this also helps recharge our waterways and aquifers, and by the fact that it's slowed down by the root system, it's also getting in a little bit cleaner than perhaps it came out. Unfortunately, this really amazing dynamic system that we have globally is considered to be the most endangered biome or terrestrial biome in the world. So if we look at temperate grasslands across the entire planet, they're among the most imperiled. And unfortunately, that's especially true for the Great Plains and the ecosystems we have here in North America. So when we look at what's left of North America's grasslands, it becomes rather grim. So starting with the tall grass prairie that's on the easternmost side of where we have our plains, we're looking at an estimated 4% remaining out of the entire extent that ran from Canada all the way down to where we are in Texas. For mixed grass prairie, moving a little bit west, estimates are around 20% remaining. For short grass and Chihuahuan desert grasslands, we're in about a 50% estimate of grassland remaining. And the reason for that, honestly, is rainfall. So the tall grass prairie receives about 56 inches of rain per year, give or take, depending on where you are within the range. As you move further west, you're receiving less and less rainfall. And by the time you get close to the Chihuahuan grassland system, we're talking about less than 10 inches of rain per year. So what happened to the prairies in North America, particularly the ones that receive rain, is most of them were converted to row crop agriculture. Prairie soil, in part because of their fantastic root system, is incredibly fertile. And combined with great rainfall, a lot of that was converted over. For areas that receive less rain, most of them are still working land. So it's pretty common to see them still in use for cattle grazing or grazing of sheep and goats. But honestly, I expect that the 50% number is honestly even too high. When we look at Texas, we're incredibly lucky because Texas is a prairie state. 2/3 of the state before European settlement were estimated to be prairie. And what's absolutely fantastic is that within our state alone, you can start in tall grass prairie and drive the whole length and end up in Chihuahuan grasslands, which is absolutely fantastic. And if I have it my way, it would be a point of Texan pride that we have so many cool prairie grasslands that we can see all within our state. But the grim reality is, for some of them, they are incredibly imperiled, particularly the tall grass prairie system and the coastal prairie system of Texas. For tall grass prairie, we're looking at less than 1% remaining in the state. So incredibly imperiled systems. And there's a reason for that. So if we just look at the tall grass prairie nearby Dallas, this story actually starts with the cotton rush. So around the 1860s, cotton was a major majority of the US export. And once we see the combination of developing rail systems, the rail hitting Dallas in 1872, we start seeing a massive cotton boom nearby, which put a tremendous pressure on the tallgrass systems around the city. And as you can imagine, having one of the largest cotton markets means that there's a lot of cotton out in the fields. And ultimately, what that ended up looking like is that by the 1920s, it's estimated that 80% of the tallgrass prairie, which is Blackland Prairie type, which I'll touch on in a second, was gone. It's been converted over to row crop, and unfortunately, those prairies are never going to be the same. It's not until the 1930s that we see a shift in Texas to what most people actually think of when they think of Texas economy and culture, which is oil and industry, energy industry development, along with the cattle economy and the cowboy economy, longhorn steer, rodeos, and things like that. But no matter how you look at Texas history, it's deeply entwined with the prairie ecosystem around it. And today, there are still several pressing threats to what is left of Texas prairie. The first three are by far the biggest threats right now, and that is continuing development. Whether we're talking about houses or strip malls or roadways or electric lines, development is going to add pressure to a lot of the systems, like tallgrass prairies, where there's already not a lot left. And for things like electric lines, it may not seem like it, but as soon as you run an electric line over even an intact grasslands, oftentimes that could act the same way as fragmenting it with a roadway for some species. And what's becoming an increasing conservation dilemma is renewable energy development. So I'm a big fan of renewables, but what I'm not a very big fan of is when we decide to put renewable energy development on pristine tallgrass prairie, which unfortunately is something that we're seeing right now in the state of Texas. Currently, the Smiley Woodfin Prairie, which is about a 3,000-acre pristine, beautiful tract of tallgrass prairie, is currently underway to become a solar farm. And unfortunately, issues like this are going to be things that we're going to have to find a way to mitigate in the future to keep beautiful and very rare tallgrass prairie on the landscape. With development also comes new pressures, particularly the aversion of folks to fire. As you can imagine, fire is incredibly scary, but prescribed burns actually are an amazing way to help prevent wildfires. But with people being fire adverse, again, understandably, what happens is then you're removing a disturbance factor out of a lot of these systems. And if we remove other potential disturbance events, such as your major grazers in particular, what happens then is we're going to see those vegetation communities again move out of that disturbance state that keeps them prairie, moving increasingly woody to the point that it can no longer be considered a prairie. So that's going to be a massive issue, especially when you consider it in conjunction with climate change. Climate change is expected to increase the amount of woody encroachment and woody pressure on our prairies already, among other things that it's going to do, including changes in precipitation patterns and increased temperatures. And an ever-present and ever-increasing problem is invasive species, which, as you can imagine, goes hand in hand a lot with development and fragmentation as well. The more you break up these contiguous tracts of prairie, the more you can potentially introduce new invasive species to these areas that maybe were protected by a significant buffer of native plants. So there's a lot of things going on that folks like NPAT and myself, or organizations such as NPAT and folks like myself, are dealing with on a daily basis. So to put this into context, this is the DFW Metroplex and a satellite image courtesy of Google Earth from 1984. What I want you to do is turn your attention to the outskirts of DFW, particularly Frisco, McKinney, and the Denton-Louisville area, for just 1 second, because I'm going to fast forward us to 2020. And again, back here's 1984 and 2020. So we're seeing an really impressive and massive push outward, not just of the DFW area, but all of the major cities right now in Texas, which you can imagine any of these open areas that are cross timbers on the west and tall grass prairie on the east are under more and more pressure for development, which puts all of the biodiversity and unique species that we have at prairies at risk. Some of these species require incredibly large tracts of contiguous grassland in order to survive. As we start to break down even larger pieces into, say, 2 or 3 acre subplots, we're breaking up really big tracts of grassland. And we run the risk of losing some of these species forever because of it. And furthermore, the more we break up these prairies and introduce, again, new edges, not only are we combating invasive species, we're potentially isolating these species from one another. They may not be able to navigate things like new roadways, for example, to get to more of their species to successfully reproduce, which makes them vulnerable to things like disease. And it can also make them incredibly vulnerable in smaller populations to events like we had last February with a catastrophic freeze. So saving as much grasslands and big parcels as we can is incredibly important for the wealth of animals and plants that call these places home. And not only that, in Texas, we have types of prairies that you can find nowhere else. One of which is the Blackland Prairie, which is where Dallas happens to fall. It's an absolutely amazing ecoregion. It was named for its dark soils. If you are lucky enough to grab a handful of it, it actually almost looks like a milk chocolate color. It's really beautiful soil. And it's filled with a lot of clay content, which does a lot of cool things. And my absolute favorite thing, even being an absolute prairie advocate, running around in prairies in all different states, this is still completely wild to me, that in Texas, there's something called gilgai in Blackland Prairie, where the clay expands and contracts with drought and increased moisture to form ephemeral ponds. And in these ephemeral ponds, you can find crayfish. It still blows my mind. They're so cool. And they serve incredibly important functions for amphibians, not just the crayfish that live in our water tables. You also get another really cool geological formation or soil formation called mima mounds. They're occasionally called pimple mounds also in Texas, just commonly. And what it is a very small raised elevation. It's essentially a hill in miniature. In Texas, we find these in areas topped with a sandy soil. And what's really fascinating to me as somebody who has an incredible passion not only for this ecosystem, but for science as a whole, we still have no idea how they form. So somebody needs to get on this because I really want to know before I move on to the next world how mima mounds form. So somebody get on it. But aside from the great mystery of how they form, mima mounds, by having just that small change in elevation, have unique plant communities associated with them, particularly in this other prairie, which also can only be found in Texas, and that's the Sylvius dropseed prairie. So Sylvius dropseed is a particular type of grass that's found only in Northeast Texas, and it's an indicator of unique vegetation communities. And on mima mounds in Sylvius dropseed prairie, you can even get, with the change in hydrology, the amount of moisture from the tops to the bottom, sundews, which is really cool. And where Sylvius dropseed prairie occur in the Northeast Texas is also really interesting to me because it's the convergence of 3 ecoregions. So you get this overlap of soil and overlap of vegetation type to produce this really unique community. And that's where the post oaks, savanna, the piney woods, and the Blackland Prairie all happen to meet. They're very cool, very unique, and again, only found in Texas. This should be a point of Texas pride. This is something that we have that none of the rest of the world has. And they're absolutely gorgeous. So with the loss of prairies came an increasing amount of citizen concern, which is how the Native Prairies Association of Texas came to be founded in 1986. We are a land trust focused on the protection of grasslands, so that's both prairies and savannas, as well as the restoration of those systems to the landscape wherever we can, or assisting private landowners to find the help that they need to do so successfully, as well as putting forward as much education as we can about prairie systems and trying to get people out into prairies as much as possible. Because I'm a firm believer that when you're in a prairie, you can't help but fall in love with them. Naturally, with Texas being a prairie state, we work statewide from east to west. And we are a membership organization. We're driven by chapters and our individual members across the state. And we do have a chapter in Dallas, not dropping any significant hints, but if anyone should be really inspired from this presentation, there is a Blackland NPAT chapter that is formed in Dallas. And for anyone who happens to be tuning in from a different part of the state, again, we are a statewide organization. We have chapters in many of the large cities within the state, and hopefully should have one forming soon in Northeast Texas as well. But currently, NPAT protects over 5,000 acres on 25 different properties throughout the state. We are always adding more. We're currently in the process of adding more as we speak, and it's one of my favorite things to do because we work primarily in conservation easements. So conservation easements is a way that we as a land trust can work with landowners to keep prairies into perpetuity, meaning that they are going to be prairies forever. And the way that we do this is we come up with a legally binding agreement between us and the landowner that restricts land uses such as development. So what we do is sit down at the table, come up with something that's mutually beneficial that we both like, that would prevent strip malls or houses or subdivision of this property from ever occurring into the future. And what's beautiful about it too, especially since Texas is the leading private land state in the US, is it allows landowners to retain their title. Their property is still private. They can still manage it the way that they've always been managing it, which often is absolutely amazing. We have some fantastic prairie land stewards in the state. And they can rest easy knowing that it will never be able to be developed, even if this property is sold or moved to another holder. That conservation easement moves with it forever and essentially protects this property from being developed forever. And it's a really beautiful thing. NPAT, in addition to working with private landowners to protect their property through conservation easements, also is lucky enough to be a land holder. So we have a variety of different parcels, but I'm going to be primarily just focusing on the ones in North Texas. And these are also properties that we hold education events, workshops, and bio blitzes at, because again, the more we can get people into prairies, I feel like the more people will fall in love with them. And if anybody's ever interested in visiting any of these prairies, please contact us or contact me, and we can arrange tours and site visits and things like that. But the Paul Matthews Prairie is an absolutely gorgeous example of Blackland Prairie, and it is a remnant. So remnant prairie is what we use to describe prairies that have never been plowed, meaning that as far as we are aware and can tell, the microbial community is the same, the fungal community is arguably as close to the original as it possibly can be. There's a greater biodiversity, and we're so happy that we're protecting 125 plant species on this 100 acres. Including also those gilgai and those prairie crayfish I was just very excited about a moment ago. And since we do try to involve people as much as possible and get their hands dirty and get them interested in prairies, we also have a lot of bio blitzes using iNaturalist. And currently we have 202 observed species, including 20 native bee species, which as with most things that are dependent on grasslands, as you can imagine, have been in decline. So seeing a diversity of native pollinators is always a really welcome thing. We are also lucky enough to be able to protect 2 parcels of Sylvia's dropseed prairie in Northeast Texas. So we have a family that has worked with NPAT to leave us, again, 2 pieces of property, first from Mary Talbot, and then a second property that was worked out with her sons. And these 2 pieces of property are a beautiful example of why we should value our hay meadows a lot more. So anywhere that you see hay bales, there's a potential chance that it's been a hay meadow as far as anyone can trace back, which means there's a chance it could be one of the few remnant unplowed prairies that we have in the state. And in the case of the Talbot family, that was the case for both of these parcels, and they're remnants of this beautiful system. And we have been lucky enough to have botanists be able to go out and look at our Sylvia's dropseed prairies. Between the 2 prairies, we're currently saving 330 species of plants. And I'm helping to get more folks out to do more biodiversity surveys with me and get their hands dirty and poke around in these prairies, because I know there's way more than 108 species, especially between the 2. And we've been lucky enough to at least document 18 species of butterflies. And again, I expect there's way, way more. The last prairie that we own that I'm going to talk about is Madden Prairie. So it is much further west of the Metroplex. We're looking at Colorado City, so just past Abilene. And it is a rolling plains prairie ecosystem. So we're getting into that mixed grass system. We are very lucky to have Madden Prairie because it was a remnant of sandy mixed grass prairie, which is a really beautiful ecosystem. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it as well is that most of it was actually in cotton farm when NPAT acquired this piece of property. So it was a tremendous restoration effort to get it up to the 300 some odd acres of mixed grass prairie that currently comprise part of this property. So you can imagine how excited I am to see years of restoration work produce over 300 species observed, including the Texas horned lizard, which is, as many folks know, a species that is under conservation concern within the state and throughout most of the state. So it's really exciting to be able to see them protected on this prairie property. But this is also one of those cases where you can see how beautiful and diverse prairies are, because out of those 900 species observed, we found 800 of those with a group of about 12 people in 2 days, with nocturnal bioblitz or mothing, so looking at all of our moths and nocturnal insects coming to sheets and blacklights, and 2 days poking around in plants, we came up with 800 species in 2 days. This is why it is common for people to say that if you look at prairies up close in a small area, you're going to find more biodiversity in some of these ecosystems than you do in some of the tropical rainforest ecosystems. It's amazing and a great privilege to be able to give people this opportunity to look at prairies up close and just see how amazing and how much life there is and how amazing the biodiversity is in these systems. And Madden Prairie is near and dear to my heart as well, because not that long ago, I primarily worked on birds. We have 163 species documented using this property, including many nesting grassland birds, which grassland birds are currently in the largest decline out of any biome that we have in the US, due largely because of that habitat loss. So seeing birds nesting on this property is also an incredibly encouraging thing. And it also brings up the point and the value of restoration. So this is our next big restoration project as an organization. We acquired 150 acres outside of Austin This is the Dow Ranch. It's NPAT's brand new headquarters. We're very excited about it. But it is a very typical example of a lot of the grassland that's left in the state. So even if there's a very large tract, often what happens is it's introduced grasses that comprise most of it so that there's not native species left or very few. Or it has been grazed very, very hard over time, meaning that what you have has been eaten down, the soil has been impacted, and it needs a little bit of rest and some TLC. So starting this summer and moving into the spring and over the next 3 to 5 years, this is going to be our major restoration effort. And even though restored prairies are never going to reach the same diversity as remnant prairies that have never been plowed, it's absolutely imperative to do so. And Madden Prairie is a prime example of that. 900 species in primarily restored prairie that otherwise would not have had habitat to use or places to nest for those grassland birds. And Dow Ranch is going to be a very exciting project, in part because it is in a very urbanized area. And I firmly believe in the importance of having urban prairies. And I'll be touching on that in just a second. But first, I wanted to talk about another citizen science initiative that NPAT runs, which is something that folks can get involved with, and that is Prairie Seekers. It's one of our programs that was put together by our Fort Worth chapter. It's designed to train volunteers and to train folks how to assess the conditions of prairies that they see based off the plant communities, the animals that they can see and hear, and what's going on as they move across the landscape in terms of impacts around it, as well as grazing regimes and things like that. And it's a really important asset to NPAT because it helps us identify conservation priorities and perhaps widens our network of understanding of which landowners are out there that would like help with restoration or would like to move forward into protecting their prairie into perpetuity and want to move into the direction of a conservation easement. And I'm excited to say that one of the things I've been working on is moving these surveys to a digital format to make them more accessible to a wider number of people. And that we're going to be having another training soon in May 14th. And if this one sells out soon, which I expect that it will, we will also be offering one this coming fall as well. Another important piece of the NPAT mission is education. So in my role, I do a lot of landowner workshops, which means that I'm trying to provide private landowners with all the resources and connections that they need to be successful, either in managing a remnant prairie to make sure that it stays free of invasive species and woody encroachment and stays healthy and robust and biodiverse, or to start from restoration from literally ground up. And it's one of my favorite things to do, especially watching landowners who have never met each other before sit down in a room and start talking about some of the problems that they have and the things that they love, and watching these people connect on their passion for this ecosystem. But rural prairies are just one piece of the puzzle. And I'll be touching on that in just one sec. I'm actually ahead of myself. The other thing that we do is try to celebrate that absolutely amazing prairie stewardship that we have. And we see a lot of it. We're incredibly lucky in this organization to be able to work with people that care so much about this ecosystem. And we want to recognize them. So the Prairie Heritage Certification Program is one way that we do this at NPAT. And it's really important to me, especially after running landowner workshops and seeing the importance of the community and connection that landowners get out of meeting each other at these events, to be able to put these folks into contact with one another on a larger scale, especially when it comes to things like being able to supply each other with locally sourced seed type from each other's prairies, which is something that cannot be valued enough. Or just helping with experience or even manpower is something that is a really important asset and a really important determinant of success for a lot of these landowners. And of course, one of the things we are building into this program is information on management and also restoration. And furthermore, to advertise how amazing these landowners are and these prairie advocates, they'll receive a sign and we'll be talking about their stories across all of NPAT's statewide platforms. But as I mentioned, rural prairies are not the entire story, especially as we are developing increasingly in the state. We need urban prairie systems too. So we need more prairies in developed areas and more conserved prairies in rural areas for a couple of reasons. For urban systems, it's just a reality. Texas is projected to grow in population size. Depending on where you go for your source, that number wiggles a bit, but the consensus is we're going to have a lot more people in the state very quickly for the foreseeable future. And if we cannot stop development, it's important to work with it and to preserve as much of the natural system and ecosystem function as we can. And part of the reason for that is just from human interest. With an expected 17% increase in water demand over the next couple of years with this expansion and development, it's going to be really important that we have ecosystems and the plant communities to be able to capture that water and put it back into our drinking supply. And there's already evidence that's coming out of Houston that prairies and native plants are really great at helping cool urban areas, because as we increase the amount of hard, hot surfaces, we're going to start getting hit with more and more urban heat island effect and also flooding. And again, prairies per acre are able to absorb 250,000 gallons. So an absolutely incredible asset to build into our future Texas development plans. Work with our systems instead of against them. And one of the things that will be released really soon is the Prairies in the Metroplex accessibility map. So this is something that I've been working on in the last couple of days, showing folks where in the Metroplex they can actually go out and get involved with prairies, whether that's just going for a walk, helping on work days, coming out to see some of the NPAT sites when they are open to the public, and essentially just getting that experience of being able to get their hands dirty and see prairies up close. Because again, I firmly believe that if folks are in prairie systems and are able to look around and experience them and see the prairie for more than just the grasses, as it were, you can't help but fall in love with this system. For example, this is a species of foxglove that I took a picture of in one of the Dallas urban prairies, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Prairies are the Texas predominant ecosystem, and it's important that we consider them as we expand. And in areas where expansion has already happened, it is entirely possible to introduce prairie into these areas again, essentially on a small scale restoration effort. So the term for this that you'll hear a lot is pocket prairie, which is essentially planting a prairie on a smaller scale. So that's bringing urban plants back into your urban areas, and is an absolutely wonderful education tool. The pocket prairies that NPAT has been involved in, especially in the Houston area, and with some coming to North Texas soon, are primarily put nearby schools. So they're usable as an educational resource for children to be able to monitor changes in plants, the pollinators that they get, and be really involved with these systems. And again, also providing those handy ecosystem services that I just mentioned, like reducing heat and helping with flooding. But for anyone who's listening to this talk, it also allows a targeted advocacy tool for urban areas, because it is absolutely possible to ask and bring up in a variety of different places, can we set a small portion of this aside for native plants? Because even just including one species in a small area could mean a significant difference to a native pollinator species. It is absolutely worth doing and advocating for. And there are things that we have to help with this. So the 9 Natives program is something that members of NPAT worked on in collaboration with a variety of different groups down in Houston. And it is soon coming to North Texas. It's actually in the works. And what this is a list of native plants that work really well in pocket prairie or even native garden design for both shade and sun. And they're hand selected with information about how to plant, sources, all readily available either from seed or either from plant sellers that will sell you transplant plants, either grasses or flowers. And all of these things are available on the NPAT website. So you have a place to get started. Because as much as I would love to be able to sit in everyone's HOA board or talk to their local schools or their city councils, or even going to your places of worship to advocate for putting just a little bit of those native species back in areas that are monoculture lawns that are, greedy with our water supply, I can't. And this is a place where everyone can absolutely advocate for prairie systems in the Metroplex and in urban areas. And if I haven't convinced you that prairies are an amazing, cool system that should be a point of Texas pride for everyone, and they're worth saving just on their merit alone and the unique biodiversity they have, I can give you a monetary reason too. And here it is. Texas land trusts are estimated to provide $1 billion, that's $1 billion, in benefits to the Texas taxpayers each year. And again, that's through those ecosystem services. So you can indeed put a price tag to water filtration and water absorption from prairies. And with that, I'm just going to highlight some events. So coming up soon, we're going to have the iNaturalist City Nature Challenge. Please get out there and become involved in prairies. I'm hoping to put on a prairie bio blitz for this as well. So you'll see announcements for this sometime soon. We are a little competitive, so we do need to beat Houston this year. So any help is appreciated. Furthermore, we're going to have events in May. I'm going to be talking about the May 7th event at White Rock Lake in a little bit more detail in a second. But the Prairie Seekers Citizen Science Program is having that training on May 14th. In June, I'll be hosting a Native Pollinators BioBlitz and Workshop on Matthews Prairie out near Farmersville. And I'll also be having another 2-day BioBlitz and Mothing Night out at Madden Prairie by Colorado City in July. So White Rock Lake is in Dallas. And better yet, we're having a really awesome Native Plants and Prairies Day there on May 7th. Please come. It is rain or shine. It's free to attend. It's going to be jam-packed with amazing guest speakers, exhibitors. I will be there. You can meet me in person. And we'll be having fantastic prairie walks at the urban prairie that is there. So please come. And to stay updated with any of our events, please join NPAT. We're currently actually having a membership drive, so membership fees are reduced right now. So if you're interested, this is an excellent time to decide to become a member. Please feel free to use the website or QR code. And I'm just going to leave it here in case anyone has their fancy struck for a second, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Wow, Dr. Aulicky, that was absolutely amazing. And I think you more than convinced us to have Texas pride over these prairies.
Success.
And yes, you have quite a few questions. So let's just go ahead and jump in and see if we can get through most of them. If we can't get through all of them to the audience, I will forward these questions to Dr. Aulicky, and she can answer them individually. So let's go ahead. So the first question we have here is, are cities thinking about adding prairie plants along with urban trees to mitigate the climate crisis?
Some cities, yes. And that's something that, again, as I mentioned at the end of my presentation, we could always use more help in advocating for, because any ornamental plant or typical introduced grass plant that we're using for a purpose, I can guarantee that there's a native plant that can do the same job.
Thank you. Next question, is privet considered a woody invasive species?
Oh my goodness, yes. Privet is a bane to any land manager in the state of Texas. It is an incredibly gnarly invasive. It's difficult to get rid of, in part because it has beautiful red berries and birds love eating red fruit. So it becomes really difficult to get rid of. Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. And next question, and I think you did kind of touch on this after this person asked the question, but what is a Blackland Prairie and how can we save it? So if you want to just go through the basics again.
Absolutely. So Blackland Prairie is a specific type of tallgrass prairie that we have. It's named Blackland because of its really dark soils, and it's got a beautiful high clay content, which gives a variety of different soil features. It is something that you see along almost all of the major cities from Dallas going south towards San Antonio. So it gave rise to a lot of the cities that we have in Texas, and most of the Texas pride too.
Thank you. So next question, can you go into detail on how controlled burning helps to prevent wildfires?
Yes, I love this question. Thank you so much for asking it because it gives me an excuse to talk about this incredibly important topic. So, the reason why prescribed burns are an excellent preventative for wildfires is first that they're controlled and they're planned. So in places where you have wildfires, typically what's happening is you have a lot of dead fuel on the ground, which means that it's a fire waiting to happen. With prescribed burns, what you're doing is getting rid of that fuel in a controlled way and in a way that benefits the ecosystem, because again, prairies are disturbance-based ecosystems. So you're getting rid of dry dead thatch and a lot of the fuel that could have been a problem if it hadn't been burned by doing prescribed burns.
Thank you. I was actually wondering that question myself too. It's not an easy concept to understand, just by, like how is it that you can burn something and that prevents the burning? But thank you, you've described it beautifully. Next question. It seems like there are a lot of people relocating to Texas. Is the prairie land at risk because of this?
Absolutely, yes. Just because with increasing population means increasing development, which means that you're going to be putting more and more pressure on even tall grass prairie, which is there's less than 1% left in the state. And that's true around any major city in Texas, as Texas is a prairie state. As we expand development, that ultimately means most places that are getting selected are prairie.
And just as a follow-up to that, what can we do to prevent the negative effects of that? Like, does it like how can we protect the land, even if we welcome everyone here? How can we protect the land, our prairie land in Texas?
So first and foremost, the first thing we can do is actually work with our native system. So it's entirely possible to design neighborhoods and areas that are going to incorporate prairie. Would I love for it to be thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of pristine prairie? Yes, that's important too. But realistically, if we're going to develop, we can set aside parts and parcels of that and put in native plants after development to bring it closer to what's already around those areas. And the next part to that, which is a bit of an unconventional answer perhaps, is become a housing access and equal access to housing advocate, because human rights issues are intrinsically environmental issues. So the more we can advocate for housing access will also alleviate a lot of the pressures that we have on our prairie systems too.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, we could go on with that forever. But next question. Someone was asking, how can he join a chapter? And Ms. Moss, she put in your link, Texas Prairie .org. So is that correct? Is that how someone can join a chapter?
Absolutely. And as you become a member, it will put you in touch with the folks that organize the individual chapters. It is also entirely okay to reach out to the Blackland chapter directly, which is the name of our Dallas chapter, assuming you're speaking about Dallas.
Yes, thank you. And we still have some more questions, but I wanted to make sure to pause before we run out of time. My colleague Sonia, she has a link that she'll post in the chat momentarily with an evaluation form. And so I encourage the audience to click on that link and fill out the form so we can improve future events. And while everyone is filling out that link, let's move on to the next question. Do you have a BioBlitz schedule for this spring yet?
Oh, yes. So I'm hoping to schedule one in an urban area in Dallas for the City Nature Challenge. But aside from that, I will be hosting a BioBlitz out on Paul Matthews Prairie outside of Farmersville on the 25th for Native Pollinators Week. So we're going to be specifically looking for native bees and butterflies and even crab spiders, the underdog of pollinators. And it's going to be an absolute good time. And in July, there's going to be another 2-day BioBlitz out at Madden Prairie, which I understand is a lot further away, but it is a chance to get out and explore 1,114 acres of mixed grass prairie in shrubland.
Wonderful, thank you. And that link is posted now, so please fill out the evaluation form. Next question is, do wind turbine farms disrupt a prairie ecosystem? I know you mentioned the solar farms, but what about the wind turbines?
They do as well in different ways to some extent, because solar farms essentially shade out the plants underneath. Wind turbines do to a certain extent, but as many of you probably know, what becomes more of an issue with wind turbines is the impact to flying creatures, both migratory bats and birds, as well as the aversion of grassland species to any anthropogenic structure. So there's a lot of research that shows that if you put up a telephone pole or a building, grassland species are going to avoid those. So just by having turbines present, ignoring any potential other effects from them, they're going to avoid those landscapes.
Thank you. Next question is, how do we relocate some prairie crayfish from part of the Heartland development? And second part is this person, she said she found one in a Gilgy a few years ago there. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Close. It's Gilgai. It's one of those weird words
Gilgai.
that we borrowed from somewhere, and I don't remember where. For your crayfish relocation, that I'm not entirely sure how you would start to go about it, or perhaps even if, depending on where you're going to introduce them to, how that would go. So I'm afraid I'm not able to give you a good answer for that question. They also spend so much time down in the water table that you're going to have a heck of a time trying to get them up unless it gets wet sometime soon.
Thank you. And perfect timing. We've got time for two more questions, and we've got two more questions posted. So is there a way to virtually tour these prairies if someone can't make it out?
Not yet, but that is an amazing idea. And for the North Texas properties in particular, it's typically myself that is organizing or working with groups that would like to come out. So if you have a group of folks that would like to come out and visit prairies and experience this, just reach out to us.
Thank you. And final question is, where are the native grasses documents on your website?
Ooh, let me dig up a link for you. I should have included one in my presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing and do the dirty internet thing for a second.
No problem. Take your time. Just another reminder, the evaluation link is posted in the chat. So anyone still with us, please go ahead and fill out that link. And thank you, Lori. Lori went ahead and posted the City Nature Challenge link. So please visit that as well.
And please hit as many prairie sites as possible. I'm hoping to release that map soon of places that are publicly accessible in the DFW Metroplex, and get out there and see what they're all about. And I just added a link in the chat to at least one of the 9 native booklets.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Aulicky. Is there any final words that you have for us before we conclude the session?
Absolutely. And that is prairie conservation requires all minds and all kinds of people. So no matter what special talent or passion you have, I guarantee I can find a way to use it to benefit prairie conservation in the state. And if something that's you're interested in, please reach out to us. And if nothing else, get out into a prairie.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. This was an absolutely wonderful presentation. I think you've inspired all of us. To the audience, please join us this Sunday for Oak Cliff Earth Day. It is at Lake Cliff Park. It's going to be an amazing event. Dr. Aulicky, are you going to be there? Representing? No? Okay, that's okay. But yeah, Dallas College Sustainability will be there. We are the main sponsor, so we look forward to seeing all of you. And you can look in your newsletter, the sustainability newsletter, for more information, or our website. And Dr. Aulicky, we will go ahead and close the session now and go back into practice mode and debrief. Thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.